Hi, Terry Schmidt. Welcome to this session. I'm going to share with you how you can use the logical framework approach and the four cornerstone questions to improve virtually any process. We'll go through a case study from Sony Electronics showing how three people who took the initiative made a major improvement in their operations. In addition to this particular case study, I'll talk about the generic logic that you can apply to similar projects. Here's the theory of generic logics. Projects fall into various types. There are construction projects, there are IT projects, talent development projects. Process improvement is what we're going to talk about today. And I find that projects of the same type have a similar underlying problem-solving structure. A solution strategy follows basically the same pattern, regardless of the specific improvement that you're looking for. And you can customize these generic patterns to fit your own project. Here's how to benefit most from this case study. Focus on the thinking process and the generic process, not the details of the case study. Recognize that this solution that they came up with is one approach, and there can be others. Most importantly, look for how this applies in your context. How can you take these ideas and apply them directly to your own issues? And if this topic is beyond what you normally do, use this learning lesson to broaden your strategic awareness, to broaden your functional understanding, because some of the best learning comes from situations outside of your direct experience. So why do improvement projects in general? Well, it's to make something work better. And they go by various names: re-engineering, process redesign, problem solving. But the basic idea is take a system, take a process that's not working great, and improve it in some way. I'm first going to introduce a generic logic of improvement projects, and it looks like this. Remember, the first question we ask is, what are we trying to accomplish and why? And we set up a hierarchy of objectives. The generic logic is as follows. The goal is always the operational improvement and benefits. Are we trying to save money? Are we trying to improve customer service? What is it that we're trying to do? What's the big picture that motivates this particular project? The purpose is a change in conditions after we've done the project. When the new process is working, what's different? Every project is a change project of some sort, so we're going to design the strategy based on what do we need to make happen to make that change occur. Then we pop down to outcomes. Outcomes are things that we can control. They're deliverables, solution elements, functioning processes, and so forth. And in order to produce those, there are tasks and resources required. So the logic is, if we do these tasks and resources, we can produce a set of deliverables. If the set of deliverables will create a change of some sort in the nature of the process, and if that, it will contribute to a goal of some type of improvement. I've been involved in hundreds of improvement projects, and they all follow this basic logic. We talked about the importance of language and having the right words. Here's some of the key verbs to use in crafting your purpose and goal statements. Things like simplify, improve, accelerate, increase, strengthen, optimize, transform. Something that indicates a change in the nature of the process. At the input and outcome level, words like identify, if it's an input, or identified if it's an outcome. Create, develop, prioritize, design, build. Choosing words carefully is important because language by its very nature is ambiguous. So we want to start out to create understanding by choosing the right words. Here's the background of the case study. Sony, a Japanese company, has its main U.S. manufacturing operation in San Diego. They have three separate business units co-located on a very large site. The business units made large TVs, computer monitors, and each business unit had their own purchasing, inventory, and payment systems. The problem, as you might imagine, was inefficiency and wasted dollars. They couldn't get the best prices from the various vendors because they didn't have large enough quantities. If they pooled all the purchases, they could save a lot of money. There was duplicate functions, a lot of inefficiency, and frequently they would be out of certain parts, which brought the production line to a halt. Here are steps to solving these type of problems. First, identify what are the possible objectives. Brainstorm or take them from a scope of work. Second, organizing them using causal logic. Begin to put it into the logical framework so you distinguish what you can make happen, what's necessary to make happen in order to achieve this higher goal. Third, add measures. Sharpen the objectives with success measures. Quality, quantity, and time. What does it look like when we've achieved this objective? Then identify and add assumptions. Assumptions are the jumping off point to risk mitigation. Next, to develop the input action plan. And it's my experience that a lot of teams prematurely jump to the input action plan because there's comfort in a Gantt chart. If we were working as a group on this, the first step would be to identify the project objectives. Now, if you're starting from scratch, you want to brainstorm. If there's some documentation, begin there. And as you come up with these objectives, separate them into two groups. First group is the things you can directly make happen. These are going to be activities. These are going to be deliverables. These are going to be things within your control. And in addition, what you hope will happen, but you can't directly control. These will be purposes and goals. These will be the benefits or the hope for improvements that you can't directly make happen, but if you put the right deliverables in place and use the if-then causal hypothesis, you remember that, don't you? Then they will happen. This particular log frame, which we'll go through, was developed by participants in an on-site training program. 3 people spent about 2 hours on it. It's a good solid first draft. There's sufficient clarity to propose project funding for review and approval, which they did. And management really appreciated the clarity. The log frame clearly shows how the project would save dollars. And in your own project, you want to be able to justify why you're doing this work or show the connection to a valued corporate goal. And that is missing in most of the project management artifacts, systems approaches. We very quickly forget about the goal or don't really think through the problem and dive into the activity trap. So we're about re-engineering the PIP cycle, purchasing, inventory, and payments. The goal they came up with is save money while improving production efficiency. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. To get there, they had to improve this purchase, inventory, payment cycle. And then they said, what is the logical set of outcomes? What are the major steps? And this took a little bit of creativity. It took a little bit of asking around what's the best approach for a process re-engineering. And here are the outcomes that they came up with. I really like the first one, solution task force selected, because so often we forget that or take it for granted. By putting it in as an explicit outcome, we can make it happen more systematically. Second, to document the current process, the as-is process. Third, have a better understanding of the underlying problems. Fourth, to identify some of the best practices. Fifth, identify some of the parameters of the solution, any constraints that might be operating. Sixth, to examine some alternatives and choose one. 7, then to design the to-be process. And 8, come up with an implementation plan for the next phase. Your process improvement will most likely have many of these same elements. The next question then is to sharpen these objectives using success measures. And I'd like to begin at the goal or the purpose. Save money. Well, let's put some type of target in there. ABC company, actually Sony, can reduce on-hand inventory from 7 to 2 day supply and save X dollars. Now this was before they had a just-in-time inventory system. In addition, a measure of efficiency, no production lines are down for inventory errors and stockouts after a particular date. That was an issue with them. Let's pop down now to improving the purchase inventory payment cycle. There are 3 aspects to this: reducing the receiving errors, reducing the past due invoices, and making sure the raw material inventory is accurate and reducing it to less than X dollars. The team went ahead and set measures for each of these outcomes. By such and such a date, task force is recruited with 2 members from each of these 3 functions. Current process is documented. Cause of problems is better understood. They've identified some of the best practices, come up with solution parameters and constraints like budget, resources, and scope. Have examined and selected some alternative solutions, designed the to-be process, and finally developed an implementation plan. Now I want you to notice a couple things. The language format of the outcomes is always a completed verb, the ED, the past tense. Why? Because we want to know what it looks like when it's done. That makes it a lot easier for our brains to wrap around the measure. Now let's pick up a few of the key assumptions. To go from inputs, the action plan, into the outcomes, things like the team members are willing to participate, that you have data available that captures the problems and gives you the root causes. Other Oracle sites are providing correct information, and so forth. The reason for identifying assumptions: this is first of all a jumping off point to more extensive risk analysis and mitigation, But more importantly, we want to see if there's any deal breakers, any things that we really can't work around, and discover that early rather than spending a lot of resources and finding it halfway through. To go from outcomes to purpose, the suppliers are promptly providing the invoices to be paid. The Oracle system has no glitches. And to get to goal, basically the improving the purchase receiving payment cycle saves money. That's basically the hypothesis of the project. And the sales forecasts are reasonably accurate. Okay, so having done this, and the task force worked through this, took them a couple hours to do that, then they tested it. Tested it using if-then logic. If we do these inputs and these assumptions are valid, we should be able to produce those outcomes. What might be missing? What additional assumptions do we have to put in place and test? Going from outcomes to purpose, there are additional set of assumptions, and we're assuming that if this set of outcomes and these assumptions, we can get to purpose. And the next level, if purpose and assumptions, then goal. Great. So with this in place, you can go into detail about the input activities. I'm not going to cover those during this presentation, but there is a handout, a more complete handout showing the actual work that they did. Let's sum up with some of the best practice takeaways from this particular case. First, they had outcome number one, team formed. That's usually missing. We take it for granted. But what is the nature of the team that you want? And make that the first outcome. Second, what was the chunking logic? How did they organize the set of outcomes? In this case, it was by sequential milestones or the various steps in process improvement. You can chunk in other ways. You could chunk by function and who's involved in each of those. Departments. There are several ways to chunk. I have a whole section on that later. The use of first cut measures are TBD, to be determined. They didn't initially know how much money this would save, so they put a placeholder in to fill in that number later. And finally, adding outcome number 8, a next phase plan developed. If you're using phases in a project, it's very important to include in the current phase the development of the implementation plan for the next phase. So here's some tips for improvement projects. Think about how these apply to your own. Number 1, involve the key players because people support what they help create. Second, clarify the processes of interest. What are the boundaries on this? What's your scope? Third, understand the linkage with related processes and systems and identifying those through your linking assumptions. And break it into phases. In this case, design a new process, implement, and maintain. And as you go through these phases, the goal is going to remain the same, but the purpose and the outcome set will change. And finally, develop your initial log frame, review it with stakeholders, iterate to improve it, iterate to make it great. So thanks for joining me. I hope you found this useful and informative and that you can apply it in your own context. Check out the solution. There's more detail in it. You'll be able to see the specific steps they went through to make this a success. Oh, and I might mention, they got approval. They implemented it and a major cost savings. The people involved actually got a bonus because of their innovative work. So go for it, make a difference, be the project superhero that you truly are. We'll see you soon.